The train screeched to a halt in the dusty town of Willow Creek, a lonely outpost surrounded by endless plains and whispers of forgotten dreams. As the passengers began to disembark, the townsfolk gathered to see the spectacle. A.E. Mail-order bride arriving from the east, promised to a man of wealth and reputation. Her name was Clara Whitmore, and though her ivory dress gleamed beneath the harsh sun, her heart was heavy with doubt. She stepped onto the platform, clutching a small trunk and a bouquet of wilted daisies, her blue eyes scanning the crowd for the man she'd been writing letters to for a year. And there he was, James Latimer, the man who had promised her love, security, and a fresh start. But instead of open arms, Clara was met with laughter. Loud, cruel, mocking laughter that cut through the chatter like a knife. James stood with two companions, smirking as he eyed her worn shoes and travel-stained dress. "She looks nothing like the picture," he sneered, tossing the photograph he had carried for months to the ground. "Guess the camera lied," his friends roared in amusement. Clara's face flushed crimson, her eyes welling with tears. The dream she had built across hundreds of miles shattered right there, between the train's iron wheels and the dirt beneath her feet. She bent down to pick up the photograph. Faded image of a younger version of herself, and her trembling hand struggled to hold it steady. "Please," she whispered, "I came all this way." But James turned his back, the laughter still echoing. That's when he saw her, the cowboy, leaning against the corral fence just beyond the platform. His name was Colt Mercer, a quiet man with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much loss to laugh at another's pain. He'd come to town to deliver horses, but now his gaze was fixed on the fragile woman standing in the sun, alone and humiliated. Something inside him stirred, a mix of anger and empathy that ran deeper than words. He walked toward her slowly, the crowd parting as if sensing something sacred in motion. Clara barely noticed him until he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat, "you don't deserve laughter." Not from him, not from anyone. She looked up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. He was supposed to marry me," she stammered. "I don't even know what to do now." Colt glanced at James, who was still grinning, and for a brief moment, the air between the two men crackled with unspoken challenge. "You can start by not crying in front of that fool," Colt said softly. "He doesn't deserve to see you break." The train hissed as if agreeing with him. Clara wiped her tears, trying to gather what little dignity she had left. "I've nowhere to go," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Everything I own is in that trunk." Colt didn't hesitate. "Then I reckon you've got a place to go now," he said. "There's an old ranch just outside town, mine. You can stay there until you figure your next move." She
hesitated, studying him. His clothes were dusty, his hands calloused, but his eyes, those steady gray eyes, held no deceit, only quiet strength. "Why would you help me?" she asked. Colt smiled faintly. "Because I've seen what loneliness can do to a good heart. I ain't about to let it take yours, too," the townsfolk murmured as he picked up her trunk and carried it toward his, a horse-drawn wagon. James sneered but said nothing, perhaps too cowardly to challenge the man who clearly wasn't afraid of him. Clara followed, each step heavy with disbelief. As the wagon rolled out of town, she looked back once. The laughter was gone, replaced by whispers of awe. The girl who had been mocked was now riding, away with the man who had defended her, without asking for anything in return. That night, under the wide western sky, Clara sat by the fire at Colt's ranch. He had given her a clean dress belonging to his late sister and prepared coffee that tasted of smoke and kindness. "You must think me foolish," she said after a long silence, "coming all this way for a man who never wanted me." Colt poked the fire thoughtfully. "No, ma'am. I think you're brave. It takes courage to chase love when the world's been cruel." She smiled faintly, watching the sparks rise into the night. For the first time in months, she felt safe. Over the next few days, Clara found herself helping around the ranch, feeding chickens, tending the garden, learning to ride. Colt never treated her like a guest or a burden. He treated her like she belonged. Each sunset brought laughter and easy conversation. She learned that Colt had lost his family to illness years ago and had been living alone ever since. "Guess I got used to the silence," he said once, "until you came along." She looked at him then, realizing something profound sometimes. The people who find you when you're broken are the ones meant to rebuild you. Weeks passed, and the town began to whisper again, but this time with admiration. Clara, the woman who'd arrived in tears, now stood tall beside the man who had offered her a second chance. One morning, as they repaired a fence, Colt turned to her and said quietly, "I never thought I'd say this, but I reckon the good Lord sent you here for a reason." She laughed softly. "Maybe he sent us both." And then on an evening painted gold by the setting sun, Colt took off his hat, his heart pounding. "Clara," he said, voice rough with emotion, "I ain't much for fancy words, but I know what I feel. You came here looking for a husband, and I'd be honored if you'd let me be that man. Not because you need saving, but because I can't imagine this life without you." Tears filled her eyes again. But this time they weren't born of pain. They were hope, pure and fierce. She stepped closer, whispering, "Forever?" Colt smiled. Forever. And somewhere in the distance, the train that once brought her sorrow whistled again, but now it sounded like freedom.